Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this video lesson from Digital Photo, the UK's best-selling photography and imaging magazine. In the first part of this Photoshop Masterclass Layers special, we looked at the basic principles of using layers and how they work. But now let's start having some fun and see what kind of exciting images we can cook up using this powerful but easy to use tool. In this tutorial, we're going to create a multi-exposure image, filling up this train platform with moving figures. And it's all possible thanks to layers. Here, most of our layers are combined using a blending mode, and this is possible because of the way that each separate layer was shot, with all the pixels lining up. The blending mode then lets you show through the pixels you want, in this case the dark, shadowy pixels of the figures. And in a few places, we've also used the eraser tool to remove the pixels we don't want, letting those on the layers below show through. It's a pretty surreal scene, and to make things even more strange, we've used the self-timer mode on our camera, so it's possible to achieve this effect using only one person. The trick is to keep the camera absolutely still between exposures, with only the subject moving. This way you can stack up the layers in Photoshop, and the background will stay the same in every single shot, while the subject moves around. The really important thing when shooting an image like this is consistency between the shots, making them easier to blend. Therefore, you'll need to lock the camera down on a tripod to stop it from moving, keep the exposure and focus on manual, and use a preset option for the white balance because you don't want anything changing between the frames except the figure. There are loads more tips on shooting this image in the magazine, but here we're going to concentrate on blending the individual pictures together using Photoshop or Elements. Okay, so let's close down our finished image. We don't need to save that. And then come up to File, down to Open, and we'll open up the first few start images for this tutorial. That's Station 1 to Station 7. Now, to highlight them all, just hold down the Shift key and click on Station 7 there, and then we'll press Open to launch them into Elements. And here they are. Now, the first thing we need to do before we get started is make sure that we can see all of the images that we're using on screen at the same time. So to do that, just come up to Window, down to Images, and then pick Tile or Cascade. In this case, Tile might be easier because we've got a lot of pictures there, and that'll order them for us nicely. Now to start with, we're just going to be using Station 1 and 2, so I'm just going to minimize some of these other pictures. Just pressing the minimize button there to drop them into the project bin, and then we can get a little better view of the pictures that we're going to be combining first. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is just make sure that the Move tool is selected in the toolbox there, and then I'm simply going to click in Station 2 and drag it into Station 1. The important thing though is to hold down the Shift key on the keyboard as you do your dragging, because that's going to keep all the pixels nicely lined up. So let's hold down the Shift key, click in Station 2, drag it into Station 1, you'll see the small plus sign appear next to the cursor, and that means you can release the left mouse button, and in it drops. Now then we can close down Station 2 because we won't be needing that anymore, and then we need to open up our Layers palette by coming up to Window and down to Layers. Now in many versions of Photoshop and Elements it'll appear docked to the side of the interface there, so just click on it and drag it out into your workspace. Now in the Layers palette you'll see that we've now got Layer 1, which is the image that we just dragged in, and that's sitting above the original background layer, which was Station 1. And you can see Station 1 if I click the eye icon off on Layer 1, and there it'll appear. So it hasn't gone away, it's just being covered up by Layer 1. So, as I said in the introduction, what we're going to need to do is use a certain type of blending mode to make our layers work together. Now we access our blending modes up here where it says Normal in the Layers palette. Just give that arrow a click, and for this image we're going to use the Darken blending mode. So give that a click, and as soon as you do, you'll see that figure in the background appear. Now what we're doing here is we're telling Photoshop to kind of compare the two layers and give preference to the darker pixels. So taking this part of the background, for instance, those dark pixels on the background layer are being allowed to show through the lighter ones above it on Layer 1. Now before we add some more figures to our image, I'm also just going to drop the opacity of Layer 1 a little bit, just giving a slightly more ghostly look to that figure. Dropping it down there to about 70%, just using the slider under the opacity label in the Layers palette. And then we can open up our project bin, and this time open up Station 3, Then, just as we did before, using the Move tool, hold down Shift on the keyboard and drag it into our main window. Once again then, close it down now that we've dragged it in, and within our main window, change its blending mode to darken, and its opacity to 70%. Okay, so I'm just going to continue adding these other start images, just all the time making sure we hold down the Shift key to keep all those pixels nicely lined up, then changing our blending mode and our opacity, and of course closing down that image once we're done. And in this way you can see that it's quite quick and easy to build up this kind of multi-layered image, even if you're working with a large amount of files. Just the final two now then, finishing off there with Station 5, drag that one in, close it down, change its blending mode once more, and then finishing off with Station 6, I think it is. Last one goes in there then, we can close it down and change our blending mode and opacity again. And if I just expand the size of our layers palette there, you'll see already there's quite a lot going on. Of course we can turn off and on any of these individual layers using the eye icon, and by doing that we can fine-tune kind of which figures we want in our picture and which ones we don't. Now we've got quite a few more of these blurry figures that I'm going to add to the composition, but just to keep things nice and tidy within the layers palette, I'm first just going to flatten the ones that we've got. So just click on the right facing arrow there in the layers palette and come down to flatten image, and that'll just collapse all of our different layers into a single background layer. And to keep the numbers of these start images down and make things a little bit more manageable, I'm going to open up two more files now where we've actually kind of already blended lots of these different shots together. So back up to File, down to Open, and this time open up Station 8 to 12 and Station 13 to 17. And just as we did before, using the Move tool, we'll click and drag those in, change that blending mode again and the opacity, close down that original, and now we're nearly finished with our figures. One last blending mode change, one last opacity shift, and that's our full complement of shadowy figures complete. And just before we continue, I'm just going to show you what happens if you try and use these blending modes with images that aren't locked off and perfectly aligned. So let's just zoom in on our shot a little bit using the magnifying glass there. And if I just click on the Move tool again and drag this layer 2 around, you'll see just the kind of troublesome effect we're trying to avoid. A little bit too much ghosting there. We want our background to stay nice and sharp. So if you're getting results that look a little bit imperfect like this, it either means that your camera has unfortunately moved between exposures, or that you're not holding down the Shift key when you drag in those separate start images. We'll just press Ctrl and Z on the keyboard to bring us back into alignment, and then Ctrl and 0 to give us a full view of our picture. Okay, so as I said, that's our background and our moving figures sorted out. Now we need our subject. So let's back up to File, down to Open once more, and this time we're going to pick Station 18. Open that one up, and just as before, using the Move tool and holding down Shift on the keyboard, we'll drag our subject in and close down the original shot. This time though, we're not going to change the opacity or the blending mode of the layer. We're going to use the Eraser tool to simply delete the parts of the layer that we don't want, allowing those below to show through. So give it a click in the toolbox, then make sure that your opacity is set to 100%, and we'll also just bring up that brush size using the right square bracket key there to about 500 pixels, and then making sure that layer 3 is still highlighted in your layers palette. It's a simple task just to click and erase through those parts of the layer that you don't want. In this case we're just bringing through those blurry background figures again, so we don't want to erase too near to our subject, and all the time in the layers palette you can see that I'm deleting these pixels. They're being replaced by that checkerboard effect, showing us they've gone. And then we're going to do something very similar to rescue our sky here, our bleached out sky, up there in the right hand corner. So up to the File menu, down to Open, and for the final time we're going to open up Station 19.jpg and back to the Move tool, holding down Shift and dragging that one in. Once again, close down that original shot, and then back to the eraser tool, and then just as before, but being a little bit more careful this time, we'll simply erase back through those lighter parts of the image. So we're trying to bring back our figures there, but we'll try and leave a little bit of detail on the side of the train that's been brought back by that other exposure. But for the rest of the image, we'll pretty much just erase all of those darker pixels. Once again, having a look at that layer thumbnail, we can see them being removed, and we'll just give a slight bit more care to these figures here next to the side of the train, just bringing them back through a touch, and I think that's looking loads better. We just click on and off our eye icon there, and that'll help us see where any pixels have remained. There we can see some up near the top of the subject there, so let's just erase those away. And it also shows us how that new sky is improving matters no end up here in the top right of the shot. Okay, so our multi-exposure image is coming on really nicely. If I just click and drag all of these eye icons off, you can see how it's come together, just adding those separate figures, the main subject, and then finally that piece of sky. So what we're going to do before we finish is just make a few tweaks to the image, mainly concerning these slightly distracting items over here to the left of the subject. Just going to clone them out, get rid of them. But to do that, we're going to need to flatten all our layers into a single background layer. What I'm going to do first though is save our multi-layered image as a Photoshop file, a PSD file. So come up to File, down to Save As. We'll call this one station1.psd. Make sure Layers is ticked, and then just hit Save. Now with larger multi-layered files, it will take some time for them to be saved to your computer's hard drive. But once our green bar finishes creeping along there, we'll be able to get on with the rest of the tutorial. Okay, so that's our multi-layered document saved. We can then return to that if we make any mistakes. What I'm going to do now is flatten the image, just using the Layers palette menu here, clicking on it, and the flyout menu appears, down to Flatten Image, and there all our layers disappear, and we're left with a single background layer once more. Now what I'm going to do is first zoom in on the area that we want to clean up, just using the zoom tool there. And then we're also going to use layers to help us out here, but I'm first going to make a selection just down around the side of the subject there using the polygonal lasso. So we'll find that in the toolbox. There it is, just hiding under the magnetic lasso. If you lose your tools in this way, just hold down the left mouse button over a tool and the other options will appear. So we'll select that, and then we'll just make a pretty quick cutout down the side of the subject's arm there. I don't know why I keep saying subject when it's quite clearly me standing there, but it seems like the proper thing to do. And we'll just carry on making our selection, clicking as we go, then back up around the top and click again where we started, just to finish off and get our marching ants. And I'm then just going to soften the edge of our selection by coming up to Select and down to Feather. We'll just use a radius of 0.5 pixel there. Click OK. And then to create a kind of a shield for our cloning work, what I'm going to do is invert this selection so it takes in all the rest of the image, up to Select again and down to Inverse. And then I'm going to press Ctrl and J on the keyboard to copy all of those pixels onto a new layer. There we are, there's layer 1, and if you look very closely you can just see those little checkerboard effects showing where everything has been copied onto that layer except those parts that we fenced off. And then we'll just click back on the background layer. So now let's select our clone stamp tool from the toolbox. We'll set the brush size up at about 100 pixels, and then holding down the Alt key on the keyboard to select a clean area, we'll just click and clone over those parts that we don't want. So you see there, I'm able to kind of clone right up against the sleeve without those new pixels spilling over and making the effect look unnatural. We'll just take a little bit of care when we're cloning these lines in the wood. That should be okay. And then moving on to the pipe, just up here at the top, we can just click a little bit further up here to set our source point, just on the line there. And then once we paint that back over where the pipe is, we can follow the line of the wood there and get quite a good effect. So we'll just carry on kind of cloning those parts that we don't want away, those little distractions, and eventually we'll have them all removed. Just the last few bits there, and that's looking pretty good. So we'll come back out to a full view, and that's our multi-exposure, multi-layered image completed. Just noticed a funny little white line down there at the bottom of the picture, not sure why that's appeared, but we can get rid of that just by selecting the crop tool from the toolbox, and then we'll just click and drag that out over the parts of the image that we want to keep. That should be okay, so we'll click the tick. That'll crop all of our layers at the same time. And with that done, we can come back over to the menu in our layers palette and back down to flatten image. So there you have it, a really fun way of using your camera and Photoshop together, and the result is a unique multi-exposure image that you can be really proud of. I'm sure you'll agree it was very straightforward to put together using our friend the Layers palette, so make sure you give it a try with the start images provided, and then have a go with your own shots too. See you next time.